Picture this. It's 1968, and you pull up to a stoplight in what looks like your grandmother's grocery getter. Plain Jane Chevy Nova, bench seats, dog dish hubcaps. The guy next to you in the Corvette is already laughing. Then the light turns green, and 11 seconds later, you're crossing the quarter-mile finish line while he's still trying to figure out what just happened. This is the story of the sleeper that became a legend. The grocery getter that ate Corvettes for breakfast. The compact car that Chevrolet turned into one of the most devastating street weapons ever produced. Because what most people didn't know was that beneath that unassuming sheet metal, Chevrolet engineers had committed an act of automotive insanity. They'd taken their biggest, most powerful engines, power plants designed for full-size muscle cars and Corvettes, and somehow crammed them into a compact car that was never supposed to have them. But here's where it gets interesting. The Nova wasn't supposed to be a performance car at all. When Chevrolet launched the Chevy 2 program in 1960, they were panicking. The Ford Falcon was destroying them in the compact car market, selling 435,000 units in its first year alone. Chevrolet needed something cheap, simple, and economical. Fast wasn't even on the requirements list. The original Nova was about as exciting as watching paint dry. The base engine, a 153 cubic inch four-cylinder that wheezed out 90 horsepower, 0 to 60 took about 19 seconds if you were lucky. Quarter-mile times? Let's just say you could run a marathon faster. This was transportation at its most basic. Chevrolet marketed it to secretaries and traveling salesmen. The advertising tagline was literally, "Thrift never looked so good." But something strange was happening in Chevrolet's engineering department. The same guys who were building mundane economy cars by day were going to drag strips at night. They were watching what hot rodders were doing with their products. More importantly, they were paying attention to what Ford was doing with the Mustang, which had just exploded onto the scene in 1964 and created an entirely new market segment. The turning point came in 1962 when a few brave souls started dropping small block V8s into their Novas. The car's simple construction and surprisingly robust unibody platform could handle far more power than anyone expected. Word spread through the racing community like wildfire. The Nova was light, about 2,800 pounds, and with the right engine, it could be devastating. By 1964, Chevrolet made it official. You could order a Nova with the 283 cubic inch V8. Nobody was prepared for what happened next. With 195 horsepower in a car this light, the Nova SS was suddenly running with cars costing twice as much, but that was just the beginning. Chevrolet engineers looked at each other and asked the question that would change everything. What else could they fit under that hood? The 327 came next. First with 250 horsepower, then 300, then the legendary L79 version with 350 horsepower. That's 350 horsepower in a car that weighed less than a modern Honda Accord. The math was simple and brutal. Power-to-weight ratio that could embarrass Corvettes. But even that wasn't enough for the madmen at Chevrolet. In 1968, they did something that shouldn't have been possible. They took the 396 cubic inch big block, an engine designed for full-size cars like the Impala and Chevelle, and through some engineering wizardry and probably a few violations of the laws of physics, they made it fit in the Nova's engine bay. The fit was so tight that you couldn't even see the spark plugs without removing components. Changing the back ones required the flexibility of a contortionist and the patience of a saint. The 396 in the Nova was rated at 375 horsepower and 415 lb-ft of torque. Let that sink in for a moment. This was more power than most Corvettes of the era. In a car that cost about $3,200 fully loaded, that's about $27,000 in today's money. Try finding 375 horsepower for $27,000 today. But Chevrolet wasn't done shocking the automotive world, because what they did next bordered on the absurd. Enter the Central Office Production Order System, or COPO, as it became known. This was Chevrolet's backdoor method for building cars that technically shouldn't exist. Cars that violated their own internal rules about engine displacement in compact cars. See, General Motors had a corporate policy that limited intermediate and compact cars to 400 cubic inches. This was supposed to keep the divisions from competing with each other and maintain some semblance of sanity in their product lineup, but the COPO system was designed for fleet orders. Think police cars and taxicabs. Some creative dealers realized they could use this system to order things that weren't in any brochure. Don Yenko was the first to crack the code. Yenko was a Chevrolet dealer in Pennsylvania and a racer who understood what his customers really wanted. In 1969, he placed a COPO order for Novas, equipped with the L72 427 cubic inch big block, the same engine that powered Can-Am race cars, the same engine that was optional in the Corvette at a staggering $437 extra, the same engine that was basically a detuned version of Chevrolet's race motors. The L72 was rated at 425 horsepower and 460 lb-ft of torque. But here's the thing about those ratings. They were complete fiction. Chevrolet was deliberately underrating their engines for insurance purposes. Dyno tests of stock L72 engines regularly showed closer to 475 horsepower. Some builders who knew how to tune them properly were seeing over 500. Think about that power-to-weight ratio. A 2,800-pound car with 475 real horsepower. That's roughly 5.9 pounds per horsepower. For comparison, a 2020 Dodge Challenger Hellcat has about 5.7 pounds per horsepower. The Yenko Nova was delivering modern supercar performance in 1969. But Don Yenko wasn't the only dealer playing this game. Fred Gibb, a dealer in Illinois, ordered COPO Novas with the ZL1 427. Now, if you know anything about Chevrolet history, you just sat up straight. The ZL1 was Chevrolet's aluminum big block. It was designed for Can-Am racing, where weight was everything. The entire engine weighed just 500 pounds, about the same as a small block, but produced well over 500 horsepower. The ZL1 was so expensive that it added $460 to the price of the car. That's more than the entire base price of the Nova. Only about 50 ZL1 Camaros were built, and even fewer Novas. These weren't just rare, they were virtually mythical. Today, a genuine ZL1 Nova can sell for over $1 million at auction. Let me paint you a picture of what it was like to drive one of these monsters. You're sitting in what looks like an economy car, bench seat, 3-on-the-tree manual transmission, or a Muncie 4-speed if you were smart. Simple gauges that were completely inadequate for monitoring what was about to happen. You turn the key and 427 cubic inches of American Thunder comes to life. The entire car shakes. The hood actually flexes from the torque reaction. At idle, it sounds like it wants to kill something. The cam is so aggressive that it barely runs below 1,000 RPM. The clutch is heavy enough to give you a leg workout. The steering is manual because power steering couldn't handle the forces involved. This is not a car for the faint of heart. Plant your foot, and several things happen simultaneously. The rear tires instantly break loose. The car wants to go sideways. The front end lifts so hard that you can't see the road. The acceleration is so violent that you can't breathe properly. Your internal organs are trying to exit through your spine. And the noise, it's like being inside a thunderstorm. The quarter-mile times were staggering for the era. A well-driven 396 Nova could run mid-13s at over 100 mph. The 427 cars were deep into the 12s, with some pulling 11s with slicks and proper tuning. These were times that wouldn't be matched by factory cars again until the modern era. A 1969 Nova SS 427 was faster in the quarter mile than a 2010 Camaro SS. But here's what made the Nova truly special. It wasn't just the straight-line performance, it was the element of surprise. Nobody expected a Nova to be fast. It looked like the car your math teacher drove. While Camaros and Mustangs announced their intentions with scoops and stripes, the Nova could be ordered as a complete sleeper. delete the SS badges, paint it beige, stock hubcaps, steel wheels. You could build the ultimate trap car. The streets were full of stories. The businessman who destroyed a pack of Hemi Mopars at Woodward Avenue, the grandmother who turned out to be running a 427 and regularly hustled the local street racing scene, the completely stock-looking Nova that ran 11s at the track and drove home on the same tires. Chevrolet's engineers knew exactly what they were creating. Bill Thomas, one of the development engineers, later admitted that they deliberately kept the Nova under the radar. While the Camaro got all the press and marketing support, the Nova was their secret weapon. It was lighter, simpler, and easier to make fast. The suspension geometry was actually better suited to drag racing than the Camaros. The Nova's front suspension used a simple double A-arm setup that provided excellent weight transfer characteristics. The rear was a live axle with monoleaf springs starting in 1968, which helped with wheel hop issues that plagued earlier models. The wheelbase was 111 inches, just about perfect for weight transfer without being unwieldy. Everything about the chassis seemed designed for going fast in a straight line. But let's talk about those engines in detail, because that's where the real magic happened. The small block 327 that started the Nova's performance revolution was a masterpiece of engineering. Bore was 4 inches, stroke was 3.25 inches. This over-square design allowed it to rev freely to 6,500 RPM in L79 trim. The L79 used a solid lifter camshaft with 485-inch lift and 254 degrees duration at .050 lift. Compression ratio was 11.01, requiring premium fuel. The cylinder heads were the famous Fuelie heads with 2.02-inch intake and 1.60-inch exhaust valves. These flowed about 245 CFM on the intake side. Exceptional for the era. The intake manifold was an aluminum dual-plane design feeding a Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel carburetor. With headers and proper tuning, the L79 could easily make 375 horsepower, more than its 350 rating. The 396 that came in 1968 was from the Mark IV big block family. Despite being called a 396, it actually displaced 402 cubic inches due to a .030 over bore from the factory. Bore was 4.125 inches, stroke was 3.76 inches. The L78 version used rectangular port cylinder heads that flowed over 300 CFM. Valve sizes were massive, 2.19-inch intake and 1.88-inch exhaust. The L78's solid lifter cam was incredibly aggressive, 520-inch lift with 316 degrees duration. This thing had more overlap than a wedding DJ's playlist. Compression was 11.01. The intake was an aluminum dual plane with a Holley 780 CFM carburetor. But here's the secret. That carburetor was undersized. Swap on an 850 CFM unit and the L78 would pick up 20 horsepower instantly. The 427 L72 took things to another level. Bore increased to 4.250 inches while stroke remained at 3.76 inches, giving 427 cubic inches. The rectangular port heads were further refined with larger ports and better flow characteristics, over 325 CFM on the intake. The cam was even more radical, 540-inch lift with 324 degrees duration. At idle, it sounded like the engine was dying. Compression ratio was 11.01, but the combustion chambers were designed for maximum turbulence and flame propagation. This allowed the L72 to run on pump premium despite the high compression. The secret was in the piston design, a pop-up dome that created tremendous turbulence as the piston approached top dead center. The ZL1 was in another universe entirely. It used the same basic architecture as the L72, but everything was aluminum, block, heads, intake manifold, even the water pump. The weight savings were dramatic. A fully dressed ZL1 weighed about 500 pounds compared to 680 for an iron 427. That's like removing 2 adult passengers from the car. The aluminum heads had enormous ports that flowed over 360 CFM, Compression was 12.01. The cam was essentially a full race profile, 0.560-inch lift with 330 degrees duration. This engine was barely streetable. It wanted to run at 4,000 RPM or higher. Below that, it was a cantankerous mess. But when it came on the cam, it was like getting hit by lightning. The transmissions had to be equally robust to handle this power. The Muncie M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed was the hot ticket. It got its nickname from the gear whine it produced due to the straight-cut gears. First gear was 2.21, second was 1.641, third was 1.28.1, and fourth was direct 1.1. The close ratios kept the engine in its power band during acceleration. For automatics, the Turbo 400 3-speed was the only choice for big blocks. This transmission was virtually indestructible when properly built. It used a hydraulic control system with no electronics. Everything was controlled by fluid pressure and mechanical valves. A properly set-up Turbo 400 could handle over 1,000 horsepower. The rear axle was typically a 12-bolt unit for big block cars, though some early SS models used the 10-bolt. Popular gear ratios ranged from 3.31.1 for street driving to 456.1 for dedicated drag racing. The posit-traction limited slip differential was mandatory for getting the power to the ground. Without it, you'd just smoke one tire into oblivion. But raw specifications only tell part of the story. The real magic was in how these components worked together. The Nova's relatively short 111-inch wheelbase meant weight transferred to the rear wheels quickly during acceleration. The simple leaf spring rear suspension, while primitive by modern standards, was actually ideal for drag racing. It allowed the rear to squat and plant the tires. The front suspension geometry was equally important. The upper control arms were shorter than the lower arms, creating negative camber gain during body roll. This kept the tires planted during weight transfer. The anti-dive geometry minimized front-end lift during acceleration. Everything about the suspension seemed optimized for straight-line performance. The unibody construction, while making engine swaps challenging, provided excellent structural rigidity. Unlike body-on-frame cars that could flex and twist, the Nova's unibody maintained its geometry under hard acceleration. This meant more consistent launches and better times at the track. Weight distribution was surprisingly good for a front-engine car. With a big block, the Nova had about a 56-44 front-rear weight distribution. Not ideal, but better than many muscle cars of the era. During acceleration, dynamic weight transfer could put over 60% of the weight on the rear wheels, crucial for traction. The braking system was adequate, but not exceptional. Front discs became available in 1967, but drums were standard. The manual drum brakes were genuinely terrifying with a big block engine. Four-wheel drums with 375 horsepower was a recipe for disaster. The front discs were a must-have option, though even they were marginal by modern standards. Let's talk about the guys who actually drove these beasts. Because owning a big block Nova wasn't for everyone, these cars required commitment. Cold starts were an adventure. The high-compression engines didn't like cold weather. You'd crank and crank while pumping the throttle, trying to find the perfect combination that would bring the beast to life. When it finally caught, the entire neighborhood knew it. The clutch in a manual transmission car was heavy enough to qualify as leg day at the gym. In traffic, your left leg would be screaming after 20 minutes. The steering, especially without power assist, required real effort at low speeds. Parallel parking was a full upper-body workout. These cars fought you constantly. Then there was the fuel consumption. A 427 Nova driven aggressively could drain its 20-gallon tank in under 150 miles. That's about 7 miles per gallon. At idle, you could literally watch the fuel gauge drop. One owner famously said his car got gallons per mile, not miles per gallon, when racing. The heat was another issue. Big blocks generated tremendous heat, and the Nova's compact engine bay didn't have great airflow. In summer traffic, the temperature gauge would climb toward the red zone. The interior would become an oven. Air conditioning? Technically available, but it robbed so much power that nobody ordered it on performance models. But when everything was working, when you had a stretch of open road, all the compromises made sense. The acceleration was addictive. The sound was intoxicating. The ability to destroy cars costing 3 times as much was priceless. Nova owners developed a special bond with their cars, a relationship forged through adversity and triumph. The racing heritage of these cars is legendary. Novas dominated NHRA stock and superstock classes throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins, one of the most successful drag racers ever, campaigned Novas to multiple championships. His cars were so successful that NHRA repeatedly changed the rules to try to slow them down. Jenkins understood that success in drag racing wasn't just about power. It was about the complete package. His Novas were meticulously prepared. Every component was optimized. Weight was removed wherever possible. He would acid-dip bodies to remove unnecessary metal. His engines were blueprinted to perfection. The result was cars that ran consistently and won championships. The street racing scene was equally dominated by Novas. On Woodward Avenue in Detroit, on Van Nuys Boulevard in Los Angeles, on Houston's Westheimer Road, Novas were feared and respected. They were the ultimate sleeper, the car that could look completely stock and run 11-second quarter miles. There are countless stories from this era. The insurance salesman who ran a ZL1 Nova and never lost a race in 3 years. The high school shop teacher who built a Ford 27 Nova that became legendary in Southern California. The grandmother who inherited her late husband's L78 Nova and learned to drive it properly, becoming a terror at local drag strips. But let's examine the specific models that defined the Nova's performance legacy. The 1966 Nova SS with the L79 327 was the first truly hot Nova. With its 350 horsepower rating and 2,800-pound weight, it could run low 14s in the quarter mile. At $159 for the L79 option, it was one of the best performance bargains ever offered. The 1968 Nova SS 396 changed everything. For the first time, you could get big block power in a compact car directly from the factory. The base L35 396 with 325 horsepower was quick. The L34 with 350 horsepower was quicker, but the L78 with 375 horsepower was devastating. Quarter-mile times dropped into the low 13s. Top speed approached 130 mph. The 1969 models were essentially carryovers, but with better availability of the hot engines. This was also when the COPO cars appeared. Yenko ordered 37 COPO 9561 Novas with the L72 427. These cars came from Chevrolet with the engine installed, unlike his earlier conversions where engines were swapped at his dealership. Baldwin Motion, another famous performance dealer, also built 427 Novas. Joel Rosen at Motion Performance would take customer cars and transform them into street terrors. Motion offered a guarantee: your car would run 120 made in 1150 seconds or less, or your money back. They never had to pay out. The 1970-1972 Novas grew larger and heavier, but performance was still available. The 402 cubic inch big block, still called a 396, continued through 1970. For 1971-1972, the 350 small block became the top engine option as insurance companies cracked down on muscle cars. But the platform was still popular with racers who would swap in whatever engine they wanted. The subframe design of the 1968-1972 Nova actually made engine swaps easier than the earlier unibody cars. The entire front suspension and engine cradle could be unbolted as a unit. This made the Nova a favorite of hot rodders who would install everything from Buick 455s to Chrysler Hemis. Now let's talk about what it cost to own one of these monsters. The base price of a 1969 Nova was about $2,400. The Super Sport package added $280. The L78 396 was a 368 option. The M22 4-speed was $195. Positraction added $43. Front disc brakes were $64. A fully loaded SS396 would run about $3,200, roughly $27,000 in today's money. But the COPO cars were different. A Yenko Nova with the L72 427 cost about $4,000, a 25% premium over a standard SS396. The ZL1 cars were astronomical. With the engine option alone costing $4,160, a ZL1 Nova could approach $7,000 out the door. That's about $60,000 in today's money for a compact car in 1969. Insurance was another story. Companies quickly figured out that these were not grocery getters. A young male driver could pay more in annual insurance than the car payment. Many owners registered their cars with the base engine to avoid detection. Some removed SS badges and engine call-outs, anything to fly under the insurance radar. But for those who could afford it, the Nova delivered performance that was unmatched for the money. It would embarrass Corvettes, destroy Mustangs, and humble Mopars, all while looking like something your aunt would drive to church. This combination of performance and stealth created a cult following that continues today. The Nova's influence on automotive culture cannot be overstated. It proved that you didn't need a fancy name or exotic styling to go fast. It democratized performance, making serious speed accessible to working-class enthusiasts. It showed that David could beat Goliath with the right equipment. The Nova also influenced Chevrolet's future performance strategies. The concept of putting big engines in small cars would continue with the Monza, Vega, and eventually the modern Camaro and Corvette. The lesson was clear. Power-to-weight ratio trumps everything else in straight-line performance. Let me tell you about some specific cars that have become legends. There's a 1969 Yenko Nova that was discovered in a barn in Ohio in 2007. It had 4,300 original miles and had been stored since 1974, still wearing its original bias ply tires and factory chalk marks. It sold at auction for $385,000. Another famous car is the Ghost, a white 1969 Nova SS L78 that terrorized the streets of Detroit. The owner, who wishes to remain anonymous, claims it never lost a street race between 1969 and 1975. The car still exists, still runs 12s, and occasionally appears at nostalgia drag racing events. There's also the famous Dick Harrell Nova. Harrell was a Chevrolet dealer and drag racer who built some of the fastest Novas ever. His personal car ran a best of 9.98 seconds at 139 mph in 1969, the first Nova to break into the nines. This was with a heavily modified 427, but the car was still street legal and drove to the track. The technical innovations that came from Nova development influenced all of motorsports. The weight reduction techniques pioneered by racers like Jenkins became standard practice. The chassis setup tricks discovered through Nova racing influenced suspension design for decades. Even modern drag racing owes a debt to the lessons learned from these cars. Consider the header technology developed for Novas. Early big block cars used cast iron manifolds that were restrictive and heavy. Aftermarket companies like Hooker and Hedman developed long tube headers specifically for the Nova's tight engine bay. These designs, with their carefully calculated primary tube lengths and collector designs, could add 40 horsepower to a big block. The carburation setups were equally innovative. While factory cars came with single 4 barrels, serious racers quickly moved to dual quads or even tunnel ram intakes with multiple carburetors. A properly tuned dual quad 427 could make over 550 horsepower, naturally aspirated on pump gas in 1969. Transmission technology advanced rapidly due to Nova racing. The need to handle big block torque while maintaining quick shifts led to innovations in clutch design, synchronizer materials, and gear treatments. The techniques developed for building bulletproof Muncie and Turbo 400 transmissions are still used today. The rear axle developments were crucial. The 12-bolt Chevrolet rear end became legendary for its strength, but it took experimentation to find the right combination of gears, limited slip units, and axle shafts. Strange Engineering, Mark Williams, and other companies built their reputations on making Nova rear ends survive behind 500 horsepower big blocks. Tire technology was pushed forward by Nova racers. The car's relatively lightweight and short wheelbase made it challenging to hook up big power. This drove development of drag slicks and eventually street-legal drag radials. Mickey Thompson's work with Nova racers directly influenced modern performance tire design. The suspension modifications developed for Novas became the blueprint for all drag racing. Caltrax traction bars, designed specifically for leaf spring cars like the Nova, are still the gold standard today. The front suspension modifications, lighter springs, drag shocks, weight removal, became standard practice across all makes. Even safety equipment evolved because of Novas. The violent acceleration of big block cars exposed weaknesses in seat mounting, steering columns, and other components. NHRA and IHRA safety regulations were often written in response to failures in Nova race cars. Roll cages, scatter shields, and drive shaft loops became mandatory after Nova-related incidents. But beyond the technical achievements, the Nova represented something deeper in American culture. It was the underdog, the working man's hero, the giant killer. In an era of increasing social upheaval, the Nova was a constant: American power, American engineering, American attitude. The Nova proved you didn't need privilege to go fast. You didn't need a trust fund or a fancy education. With some mechanical knowledge, determination, and a modest budget, you could build something that would humble the elite. This democratic approach to performance resonated deeply with Americans. Consider the social dynamics at play. The guy in the Corvette represented establishment success. The Nova owner represented ingenuity and determination. When the Nova won, it wasn't just a race victory, it was a validation of American values. Hard work beats privilege, knowledge beats money, preparation beats reputation. The Nova also represented regional pride. Different areas had different build philosophies. West Coast cars focused on appearance and all-around performance. East Coast cars were often pure function over form. Southern cars were built for grudge racing with massive power. Midwest cars were built for consistency and reliability. Each region's Nova culture reflected its values. The stories from this era are remarkable. There was Big Willie Robinson in Chicago, who ran a 427 Nova that he street raced for money to put himself through college. He graduated with an engineering degree and went on to design safety equipment for NASCAR. His Nova paid for his education and launched his career. There was the female racer known only as Lady Death, who campaigned a black 396 Nova in Texas. At a time when women were rare in drag racing, she not only competed, but dominated. Her car was technically perfect, and she could drive as well as anyone. She proved that Nova performance wasn't just for men. Factory support for Nova racing was substantial, but often hidden. Chevrolet couldn't officially support street racing, but engineers would mysteriously show up at tracks with boxes of experimental parts. Racers with the right connections could get prototype cylinder heads, special camshafts, and blueprinted blocks directly from Chevrolet engineering. Vince Piggins, who ran Chevrolet's product performance group, was instrumental in Nova development. He understood that racing success sold cars, even if Chevrolet couldn't advertise it. He made sure racers had what they needed to win, whether through COPO orders or backdoor parts support. The parts network that developed around Novas was extraordinary. Speed shops specialized in Nova performance. Nicky Chevrolet in Chicago, Berger Chevrolet in Michigan, Dana Chevrolet in California. These dealers became famous for their Nova programs. They offered everything from mild street builds to full race preparation. The aftermarket exploded with Nova-specific products. Lakewood built bell housings and motor mounts. Moroso made oil pans and valve covers. Mr. Gasket made everything in between. The Nova aftermarket was worth millions of dollars annually by 1970. This economic ecosystem employed thousands and drove innovation across the industry. Magazine coverage was extensive. Hot Rod, Carcraft, Superstock, Popular Hot Rodding, they all featured Novas regularly. The car sold magazines. Readers wanted to know how to make their Nova faster. Technical articles about Nova modifications were among the most popular content. The magazines fed the phenomenon and were fed by it. The cultural impact extended beyond car culture. Novas appeared in movies and television shows, usually as the car of choice for rebellious characters. They represented freedom, power, and defiance. The Nova became a symbol of American automotive excess in the best possible way. But nothing lasts forever. By 1972, the party was ending. Insurance companies had figured out the game. Emission regulations were tightening. Safety standards were increasing weight. The 1973 oil crisis would deliver the final blow. The muscle car era was over, and the Nova would never be the same. The 1973 Nova was larger, heavier, and less powerful. The biggest engine was a 350 small block rated at 175 net horsepower. The quarter-mile times stretched into the 15s. The car that had terrorized streets and strips across America was neutered. It was transportation again, not transformation. But the legend lived on. Nova drag cars continued to dominate sportsman classes throughout the 1970s and 1980s. As the original cars became affordable, a new generation discovered their potential. The Nova became the foundation for countless hot rod projects. Its simple construction and proven capability made it ideal for modification. The Pro Street movement of the 1980s often featured Novas, tubbed rear ends, blown big blocks, wheelie bars. The Nova was perfect for this over-the-top style. These cars pushed the boundaries of street-legal performance. Some made over 1,000 horsepower. They were barely streetable, but absolutely incredible. The nostalgia racing movement has embraced the Nova. Original super stock cars are restored and raced in heritage classes. NHRA's stock and super stock eliminator categories are still dominated by Novas. The cars that won in 1969 are still winning today, testament to their fundamental excellence. Modern technology has taken Nova performance to levels unimaginable in 1969. Fuel injection, electronic engine management, modern transmissions, and suspension technology have created Novas that run 7-second quarter miles while retaining street manners. The basic platform has proven remarkably adaptable. Let me tell you about a modern Nova that exemplifies this evolution. There's a 1969 Nova in Texas running a twin-turbo LS engine making 2,000 horsepower. It has a full interior, air conditioning, and power windows. It runs 7.90s at 175 mph in the quarter mile. You can drive it to the track, run those times, and drive home. That's the Nova legacy, practical performance taken to extremes. The collector market has recognized the Nova's significance. Clean original cars command substantial prices. An original L78 SS396 can bring $75,000. A documented Yenko Nova sells for $300,000 or more. That ZL1 Nova? If one comes to market, expect to pay 7 figures. These cars have become blue-chip collectibles. But the Nova's greatest legacy isn't in auction prices or quarter-mile times. It's in the democratic approach to performance it represented. The Nova proved that speed didn't require sophistication. Power didn't require pedigree. Success didn't require status. You just needed determination and the right combination of parts. This philosophy influenced American automotive culture profoundly. The idea that anyone could build a fast car that performance was accessible to all, became fundamental to hot rodding. The Nova was proof that the American dream applied to cars too. Start with something modest, work hard, and create something extraordinary. The technical lessons learned from Nova development influenced all of General Motors. The G-force data from Nova drag launches helped design better motor mounts. The durability testing from street racing influenced warranty policies. The cooling problems led to better radiator designs. Every failure was a learning opportunity that improved future products. Even modern GM performance vehicles owe a debt to the Nova. The current Camaro ZL1 name comes directly from the legendary Nova engine. The philosophy of accessible performance that drives vehicles like the Camaro SS can be traced to the Nova. The idea of factory-built sleepers influences models like the Cadillac CTS-V and Chevrolet SS sedan. The Nova also influenced international automotive development. Japanese manufacturers studied the Nova's success and applied lessons to their own performance programs. The concept of putting big engines in small cars influenced everything from the Mazda RX-7 to the Nissan Skyline. The Nova's power-to-weight philosophy became global. European manufacturers took notice too. BMW's early M cars followed a similar formula: take a practical platform and add massive power. Mercedes-Benz's AMG division essentially does what Yenko did: transform ordinary cars into extraordinary ones. The Nova proved this formula worked, and the world followed. But let's get back to those engines one more time, because they deserve deeper examination. The development of the L78-396 was a masterclass in engineering within constraints. Chevrolet engineers knew they were pushing boundaries with this combination. The Nova's engine bay was never designed for a big block. Making it fit required creativity. The exhaust manifolds had to be specially designed to clear the shock towers. The radiator was moved forward to create clearance. The battery was relocated to the trunk on some models to free up space. The air cleaner barely cleared the hood. Every inch was fought for and won through clever engineering. The cooling system was marginal at best. The big block generated tremendous heat, and the Nova's compact front end didn't provide adequate airflow. Engineers added a fan shroud, increased radiator capacity, and specified a high-flow water pump. Even then, sustained high-speed running could overwhelm the cooling system. The L72-427 installation was even more challenging. This engine was physically larger than the 396, though displacement difference was only 31 cubic inches. The intake manifold was taller, the valve covers wider, the oil pan deeper. Getting it to fit required modifying the firewall, notching the frame, and creative exhaust routing. The ZL1 presented unique challenges. The aluminum construction meant different thermal expansion rates than iron components. Special gaskets were required. The cooling system needed different antifreeze mixtures. The aluminum threads were more delicate than iron. Every service procedure had to be modified for this exotic engine. But when these engines were running right, they were magnificent. The sound of a healthy L78-396 at full throttle was unmistakable. The sharp crack of the solid lifter valve train, the roar through the Holley carburetor, the thunder from the exhaust, it was mechanical symphony. No modern engine sounds quite like it. The power delivery was equally distinctive. Big blocks didn't rev like small blocks. They made their power through displacement and torque. When you pressed the accelerator, you felt the engine twist in its mounts. The whole car would squat and launch. It was brutal, immediate, and addictive. The durability of these engines, when properly maintained, was remarkable. There are L78 engines with over 100,000 street miles still running strong. The bottom ends were essentially bulletproof. The forged cranks, rods, and pistons could handle far more than factory power levels. It was usually the valve train that needed attention. The solid lifter camshafts required regular adjustment. Every 3,000 miles, you'd need to set the valve lash. This meant removing the valve covers, rotating the engine to specific positions, and adjusting each rocker arm with feeler gauges. It was time-consuming, but necessary. Ignore it, and you'd burn valves or break rocker arms. The carburetors needed constant attention, too. The Holley 4-barrels were sensitive to fuel quality, atmospheric conditions, and engine temperature. A perfectly tuned carburetor could become a mess with weather changes. Nova owners became expert at reading spark plugs and adjusting mixture screws. Points ignition was another maintenance item. Every few thousand miles you'd need to adjust or replace the points. The high-performance distributors used heavy-duty point springs that would wear quickly. Electronic ignition conversions became popular as soon as they were available. Reliability trumped originality for most owners. But this mechanical intimacy created a bond between owner and machine. You knew your Nova's personality. You could diagnose problems by sound. You understood what it needed and when. This wasn't just transportation, it was a relationship. Modern cars might be faster and more reliable, but they lack this mechanical soul. The racing evolution of the Nova continued through generations of competition. By the mid-1970s, Novas were dominant in bracket racing. Their consistency and durability made them perfect for this form of competition, where reaction time and repeatability mattered more than outright speed. The stock eliminator wars of the 1980s and 1990s saw Novas pushed to extraordinary levels. Racers like Warren Johnson, son of Grumpy Jenkins, continued the Nova tradition. These cars looked stock but were anything but. Every component was optimized within the rules. They were engineering exercises in extracting maximum performance from limited modifications. The arrival of electronic fuel injection and engine management opened new possibilities. Nova owners were early adopters of these technologies. The ability to precisely control fuel and spark across all operating conditions transformed these cars. Drivability improved dramatically while performance increased. Modern Nova builds showcase technology unimaginable in 1969. Billet aluminum blocks, titanium connecting rods, carbon fiber drive shafts. Materials science has revolutionized performance. A modern Pro Street Nova can make 2,500 horsepower and still idle smoothly. The platform's potential seems limitless, but perhaps the most impressive modern Novas are the restoration modifications. These cars maintain original appearance but incorporate modern technology. A 1969 Nova might look completely stock but hide a modern LS engine, 6-speed transmission, and complete suspension upgrade. Classic style with modern performance and reliability. The influence on popular culture continues. Novas appear in video games from Gran Turismo to Forza. They're featured in movies and TV shows as period-correct muscle cars. The Nova has become visual shorthand for American muscle, instantly recognizable even to non-enthusiasts. Social media has created a new generation of Nova enthusiasts. Instagram and YouTube are full of Nova content. Build threads, racing videos, restoration documentaries. The Nova community thrives online. Young enthusiasts who weren't alive during the muscle car era are discovering these cars and falling in love with them. The economics of Nova ownership have changed dramatically. What was once a cheap entry into performance is now a serious investment. Even project cars command significant prices. A rusty shell that would have been scrapped in 1985 is now worth $10,000. The supply of original cars is finite and shrinking. This has driven a robust reproduction parts industry. Everything from complete bodies to tiny trim pieces is being reproduced. You can literally build a 1969 Nova from a catalog with no original parts. This ensures the Nova will survive for future generations, even as original cars become museum pieces. The Nova racing legacy continues at drag strips across America every weekend. Whether it's a restored stocker running in nostalgia classes or a tube chassis pro mod making 4,000 horsepower, Novas are still going fast in straight lines. The basic formula, lightweight platform plus big power, still works. But let's talk about what really made the Nova special in its era. It wasn't just the performance or the price. It was the way it democratized speed. Before the Nova, if you wanted to go fast, you needed money. Corvettes were expensive. Big block Camaros and Chevelle cost more. The Nova gave working-class racers a chance to compete. This accessibility created a grassroots racing movement. Every small town had its Nova racers. Local speed shops specialized in Nova performance. Regional rivalries developed. The Nova became America's race car, not through marketing, but through genuine grassroots adoption. This organic growth created a cultural phenomenon that corporate marketing could never have achieved. The Nova also represented a simpler time in automotive development. These were mechanical machines you could understand and work on. No computers, no complex electronics, no proprietary diagnostic tools. If something broke, you could fix it with hand tools and determination. This accessibility extended beyond purchase price to ownership experience. Modern performance cars are faster, more reliable, and more capable in every measurable way. But they lack the raw mechanical character of a big block Nova. The visceral experience, the sound, the smell, the physical effort required to drive one hard, cannot be replicated. It's the difference between playing a video game and riding a motorcycle. This is why Novas remain so popular with enthusiasts. They offer an authentic, unfiltered driving experience increasingly rare in modern vehicles. Every drive is an event. Every acceleration run is memorable. Every successful trip is an achievement. The Nova demands your attention and rewards your effort. The stories continue to accumulate. Every Nova owner has tales of street races won, strips conquered, and mechanical challenges overcome. These stories are passed down like folklore, growing with each telling. The Nova has become mythology, but mythology based on genuine achievement. Consider the technological achievement these cars represented. In 1969, extracting 425 horsepower from naturally aspirated engines using carburetors and points ignition was remarkable. Doing it reliably enough for street use was extraordinary. Making it affordable for average buyers was revolutionary. The Nova program pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The human achievement was equally impressive. The engineers who figured out how to fit big blocks in Novas, the dealers who risked corporate displeasure to build COPO cars, the racers who developed these cars into consistent winners, the owners who kept them running through gas crises and insurance persecution. Every person involved contributed to the legend. As we look back from our modern perspective, it's easy to romanticize the Nova era. These cars were difficult to live with. They were dangerous by modern standards. They consumed resources voraciously, but they represented something pure, the pursuit of performance without compromise, without apology, without limits. The Nova asked a simple question: how fast do you want to go? Then it provided the answer: as fast as you can afford and dare. This honest proposition resonated with Americans who valued directness and capability. The Nova didn't pretend to be sophisticated. It promised acceleration and delivered it abundantly. This authenticity is why the Nova legend endures. In an increasingly complex world, the Nova represents simplicity. In an era of electronic intervention, the Nova was purely mechanical. In a time of corporate homogenization, the Nova was individualistic. It stands as a monument to a different time, a different approach, a different America. But the Nova's influence extends beyond nostalgia. The lessons learned from Nova development, inform modern performance engineering, the importance of power-to-weight ratio, the value of simplicity, the market demand for affordable performance. These concepts, proven by the Nova, guide product development today. Even electric vehicle development reflects Nova influence, the idea of putting maximum power in an accessible package. The focus on acceleration as a primary performance metric, the democratization of speed. Tesla's approach to performance mirrors Chevrolet's Nova strategy from 50 years ago. The Nova proved that performance cars don't need to be exclusive, speed doesn't require sophistication, power doesn't demand pedigree. These democratic ideals, embodied in stamped steel and cast iron, changed automotive culture forever. The Nova made performance accessible, and that accessibility changed everything. As we witness the transition to electric vehicles and autonomous driving, the Nova represents something that may be lost forever: the purely mechanical, entirely analog, completely engaging driving experience. The Nova was transportation at its most elemental: combustion, compression, and courage. No filters, no assistance, no apologies. Future generations may struggle to understand the appeal. Why would anyone want a car that required constant maintenance, consumed fuel voraciously, and could kill you if you made a mistake? The answer lies not in logic, but in passion. The Nova was about feeling alive, about mechanical mastery, about pushing boundaries. This is the true legacy of the Nova, not just the quarter-mile times or the production numbers or the auction prices. It's the demonstration that ordinary people could create extraordinary machines, that Detroit iron could be transformed into street gold, that with knowledge, determination, and a little help from Chevrolet's parts department, anyone could build a giant killer. The Nova shocked everyone with what was hiding under its hood, but the real shock was what it revealed about American automotive culture. We didn't want transportation, we wanted transformation. We didn't need practical, we craved powerful. We weren't satisfied with adequate, we demanded awesome. And Chevrolet, whether by accident or design, delivered exactly what we wanted. They put big engines where they didn't belong. They bent corporate rules to build cars that shouldn't exist. They enabled a generation of racers to pursue speed with affordable tools. They created a legend that endures half a century later. The next time you see a Nova, whether it's a pristine restoration, a modern Pro Street build, or a rusty project in someone's garage, remember what it represents. It's not just an old car. It's a symbol of democratic performance, accessible speed, and American ingenuity. It's proof that with the right engine, even a grocery getter can become a legend. The Nova didn't just shock everyone with what was under the hood. It shocked the automotive establishment by proving that performance belonged to everyone, not just the elite. It shocked the insurance companies by hiding supercar performance in economy car clothing. It shocked the competition by dominating despite its humble origins. But most importantly, it shocked a generation of enthusiasts into realizing that they could build something special, that they could take something ordinary and make it extraordinary, that with some knowledge, some tools, and a willingness to get their hands dirty, they could create something that would make history. That's the story of the Chevy Nova, the compact car that ate Corvettes, the sleeper that became a legend, the grocery getter with a secret. It wasn't supposed to be fast. It wasn't designed to be powerful. It wasn't meant to be memorable. But thanks to some creative engineers, brave dealers, and countless enthusiasts who refused to accept limitations, it became all of those things and more. The Nova proved that, in America, anything is possible if you're willing to put a big enough engine in it. And sometimes, that's all the philosophy you need. What's your favorite Nova story? Have you ever seen one of these legendary COPO cars in person? Drop a comment below and share your Nova memories. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's greatest sleeper cars, make sure to subscribe because we're just getting started exploring the machines that changed automotive history. Until next time, keep those big blocks rumbling, and remember, it's not about what it looks like on the outside, it's about what's hiding under the hood.